Have you noticed that almost every day there's another headline about artificial intelligence? A new breakthrough, a new company, a new prediction about the future. Some people believe AI will solve humanity's greatest challenges. Others warn that it may become one of the greatest risks our civilization has ever faced. But after listening to these conversations, I can't help feeling that we're asking the wrong question. We keep asking, how intelligent will AI become? But perhaps the more important question is this: can humanity develop the moral and philosophical maturity to guide an intelligence more powerful than any tool it has ever created? Could the greatest challenge of artificial intelligence not be the technology itself, but the human being standing behind it? The choices we make, the values we embed, the future we choose to create. But maybe the story of artificial intelligence isn't really about machines. Maybe it's about us. Maybe AI is holding up a mirror and asking humanity a question we've been avoiding for centuries. Who are we becoming? And perhaps the answer to that question will shape the future far more than any algorithm ever could. I've always been fascinated by philosophy, and lately I've watched AI evolve at an astonishing pace. I keep finding myself returning to the ancient Greeks. This was a civilization that gave us philosophy, formal logic, mathematics, geometry, and many of the intellectual foundations upon which our modern world is built. They weren't afraid of technology or discovery. In fact, one of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries ever made is the Antikythera mechanism, often described as the world's oldest known analog computer. Imagine that. More than 2,000 years ago, human beings were already creating astonishing machines to understand the movement of the heavens. The Greeks were innovators. They embraced knowledge, but they also understood something that I think we've begun to forget. Knowledge and wisdom are not the same thing. That distinction has stayed with me because when I look at the AI revolution, I'm filled with two emotions at the same time: wonder and humility. Wonder because what humanity has achieved is extraordinary. Think about it. We've built systems capable of writing poetry, composing music, translating languages, analyzing scientific data, and helping researchers make discoveries that once would have taken years. That is remarkable. But alongside that wonder comes humility. Because despite everything we've achieved, there is still so much we don't understand. Many people imagine AI as if every decision is explicitly programmed by an engineer. It isn't. Researchers design the architecture. They develop the learning algorithms. They train the models using enormous amounts of data. But once these neural networks become sufficiently large and complex, something fascinating begins to happen. Capabilities emerge. Patterns appear. Solutions are discovered that no one specifically programmed. Understanding exactly why every internal pathway leads to every decision remains one of the great challenges in AI research. Researchers call this the black box problem. That doesn't mean AI is mystical or magical. It simply reminds us that intelligence itself is more complex than we once imagined. And I find that incredibly exciting because genuine science isn't about pretending to know everything. It's about having the humility to say we've learned something extraordinary, and yet there's still so much more to discover. One of my favorite examples comes from a game called Go. For those who aren't familiar with Go, Go is one of the oldest strategy games in the world. Its complexity is staggering. For decades, experts believed it would take many more years before an artificial intelligence could compete with the world's best players. Then in 2016, an AI system called AlphaGo played the Korean Grandmaster Lee Sedol. During the second game, AlphaGo made a move that has become legendary, Move 37. Professional commentators initially thought it was a mistake. It didn't look logical. It didn't resemble the kind of move an experienced human player would make. But as the game unfolded, something remarkable became clear. The move wasn't a mistake, it was brilliant. AlphaGo had discovered a strategy that generations of human experts had never considered. Now, some people looked at that moment and saw a reason to fear AI. I saw something different. I saw a reminder that intelligence is a mystery, that even after centuries of scientific progress, we are only beginning to understand the nature of intelligence itself. And perhaps that's exactly how science should make us feel, not arrogant, but curious. Some researchers are now asking even bigger questions. Are there principles of intelligence that we've yet to discover? Could our understanding of consciousness evolve dramatically over the next century? Some scientists have even explored whether quantum phenomena might eventually contribute to the theories of consciousness or intelligence. There is no evidence that today's AI systems rely on quantum processes, but the fact that respected researchers are willing to ask such questions tells us something important. The frontier of knowledge is still a frontier. We are explorers, not masters. And I think that matters because humility is often the first casualty of great success. History is full of civilizations that became convinced they had reached the pinnacle of knowledge, only to discover there was still so much they didn't understand. Which brings me back to the ancient Greeks. They had a word that feels surprisingly relevant today, hubris. Today we usually translate it as arrogance, but to the Greeks, hubris meant something deeper. Hubris was the moment when human beings forgot their limits, when success became mistaken for wisdom, when power created the illusion of being above consequence. That because you were capable of doing something, you no longer needed to question whether you should. The Greeks didn't oppose ambition, far from it. They admired excellence, they celebrated curiosity, they encouraged discovery, but they also believed that every increase in power demanded an equal increase in wisdom, and perhaps that is where our conversation about AI should begin, not with fear, not with blind optimism, but with humility, because artificial intelligence isn't simply asking us what machines can become, it's asking us what human beings choose to become. And I think that question would have fascinated Socrates, because if Socrates walked into an AI laboratory today, I don't think his first question would be, "How powerful is your model?" I think he'd smile, look around the room, and ask something much simpler. What is this intelligence for? Not what can it do, but what should it become? There is a profound difference between these two questions. One is technological, the other is philosophical, and perhaps we've become so captivated by the first that we've forgotten the second. Aristotle believed the highest purpose of human life was not simply to know more, it was to become better. He used the word areti, a word that has almost disappeared from our modern conversations. It's usually translated as excellence, but that's only part of its meaning. Areti is excellence of character. It is becoming the fullest expression of what a human being is capable of becoming, not through wealth, not through status, not through power, but through wisdom, justice, courage, integrity, compassion. Imagine for a moment that Aristotle was asked to help design an AI agent. Would he begin with the processing speed, memory, reasoning ability? Perhaps. But I suspect those would not be his first concerns. I think he'd begin somewhere much deeper. He would ask, what virtues should guide this intelligence? Because intelligence without virtue is simply capability. Virtue gives intelligence direction. The Greeks had another beautiful word, phronesis, practical wisdom, not simply knowing facts, knowing how to act well, knowing how to make good judgments when life is uncertain, knowing when compassion is more important than efficiency, knowing when justice matters more than speed. That is something no algorithm can simply calculate. It requires values, experience, reflection, perhaps even conscience. And this raises a fascinating question as we create increasingly intelligent systems. Are we spending enough time cultivating phronesis within ourselves? Because no matter how advanced AI becomes, the responsibility for its direction remains profoundly human. This is where I think our modern world faces its greatest challenge. Artificial intelligence is not developing in isolation. It exists within economic systems, political systems, competitive systems. Companies race to build the next breakthrough. Nations compete for technological leadership. Markets reward speed. Investors reward growth. None of these things are inherently wrong. Competition has driven remarkable innovation throughout history. Many researchers working in AI are deeply thoughtful people who genuinely care about creating technology that benefits humanity. But every system has incentives, and incentives shape behavior. The question we must ask is whether those incentives are aligned with human flourishing, or whether they encourage us to move faster than our wisdom can keep pace. The ancient Greeks would have recognized this immediately. We mentioned it earlier, hubris, the illusion that power makes us immune to consequences. The belief that because something is possible, it must therefore be pursued. History is filled with examples of extraordinary civilizations that mistook capability for wisdom. The Greeks warned that hubris always begins with forgetting our limits. Humility reminds us to question ourselves, to remain open, to recognize that every breakthrough creates new responsibilities. Perhaps that is the lesson AI is asking us to relearn. When I speak about a spiritual perspective, I don't necessarily mean religion. I mean something much older, the search for meaning, for purpose, for wisdom. Every civilization has eventually been confronted by questions that science alone cannot answer. What is a good life? What is justice? What gives human existence meaning? Why should we choose compassion over selfishness? These questions belong to philosophy, to ethics, to the spiritual traditions of humanity. Science can tell us what is possible. It cannot tell us what is worthy. Technology can increase our power. It cannot tell us how that power should be used. That choice has always belonged to us. Perhaps that is why artificial intelligence fascinates me so deeply, not because I believe machines will replace humanity, but because they are forcing humanity to rediscover itself. As AI becomes better at calculation, perhaps we're being reminded of the qualities that cannot simply be measured: wisdom, empathy, moral courage, forgiveness, love. The ability to sacrifice for another person, the search for beauty, the search for truth. These are not weaknesses, they are the very qualities that have shaped civilization. Sometimes I wonder whether AI will become the greatest mirror humanity has ever created. Not because it reflects our intelligence, but because it reflects our values. If we value only efficiency, it will optimize efficiency. If we value profit above everything else, it will optimize profit. If we value truth, compassion, human dignity, then those values become part of what we choose to build. AI will reveal far more about humanity than it ever reveals about itself. And perhaps that is why this moment in history feels so significant. We are not only creating new technology, we are revealing the civilization we are becoming. As we enter this new age of artificial intelligence, I believe the most important question is not whether AI will become more intelligent. It almost certainly will. The deeper question is whether we will become wiser. Knowledge has never been enough on its own. Intelligence without a moral framework is incomplete. A system can identify patterns, it can generate language, it can optimize outcomes, but does it understand suffering? Does it understand compassion? Does it know whether an outcome is truly good? Those are not technical questions, they are profoundly human ones. The ancient Greeks understood that intelligence, no matter how extraordinary, must always be guided by wisdom. Perhaps that lesson has never been more relevant than it is today. The real challenge before us is not whether our machines can evolve, it is whether our character can evolve as rapidly as our inventions. So let me leave you with one final question. When history looks back on this moment, what will define our civilization? The intelligence we created or the wisdom with which we chose to use it?